Today we have Dr. Natalie Pedoff and Scott Hirsch, our Vice President of Product Marketing here at Get Satisfaction. Get Satisfaction is headquartered here in San Francisco, and we help companies create engaging customer experiences by fostering online conversations about their products and services at every stage of the life cycle. So companies of all sizes rely on us and our platform to acquire new customers, provide better service, and build better products. So today we're actually powering 70,000 active communities and holding more than 35 million consumers a month. I'm going to pass it on to Scott Hirsch now. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Scott Hirsch. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing here at Get Satisfaction, and I'm really happy to be joined by Dr. Natalie Pedoff, who's been a friend of mine and a friend of the company's for actually quite some time now. And I thought we'd just start, before I even go through the agenda, just talking a little bit about how Natalie and I met. I think it was 2009. Is that right, Natalie?
Yep, it was. I think it actually might have been 2008, and I had just started as an analyst, and I was, the conversation back then was, okay, we're gonna have to probably do this social thing, but what's the business value? And so I started to talk to customers, both vendors as well as businesses, and started to ask them, I know you didn't measure anything, but tell me what was happening, before you decided to use like a application like Get Satisfaction. Tell me what you saw happen and what changed. And that's really kind of the basis for creating that business value conversation that we've been having.
That's right. I mean, even back then, I remember you were one of the first analysts who was talking a lot about how you could use social media, like on Facebook, brand pages didn't even exist yet. Most people were still talking mostly about Twitter, but you could use Twitter as a customer service tool. And we started talking a lot about, you and I, about how, well, Twitter is a great customer service touch point, but it's not necessarily the best tool in terms of facilitating one-to-many or many-to-many conversations between customers, which is really where a lot of the ROI is in terms of how you can get ROI from a customer community. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is sort of this ongoing conversation that we've been having over the last 3 or 4 years about how to really, what are the value drivers of a customer community in terms of ROI, in terms of top line and bottom line cost savings. And so, the agenda we're going to go through today is we're going to start by talking about some macro consumer trends that we've been seeing in the marketplace and how these trends are really what's driving the value behind customer community. We're going to talk just for a second about what is a customer community? When you guys did your study, what did we mean by customer community? Because that can mean different things to different people and different vendors and different analysts, and our definition is pretty concise. Then we're going to jump right into what we learned when we did this work together, and there's 4 community platform value drivers that we've identified, and we're going to have a conversation about each one of the platform value drivers, as well as give a real-life customer example from Get Satisfaction, and Natalie's going to share some examples from her experience as well. And then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. I want people to feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and Angeline is actually going to be tracking the questions as they come in, and so if there are any that are highly relevant, she'll point them out to us during the conversation, but otherwise we'll address as in the presentation. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about these shifts we've been seeing relative to consumer trends. And what we're going to talk about on this slide really is based on a report that Forrester put out last month, 15 trends for customer service in 2013. We've been seeing these, and Natalie, feel free to jump in. I mean, we've been seeing these trends evolve over the course of the last several years, and these trends have only been accelerating. But basically, one of the big things that they highlighted was that, voice is still the #1 channel in terms of consumer preference. in terms of getting customer service and support. But number two is now self-service. And a distant third is actually one-to-one channels such as email and chat. And, really, I'll let Natalie jump in, but, really the interesting thing about this is self-service has two components. One is sort of web self-service, which is that traditional frequently asked questions, knowledge-based type of software, where you let consumers browse and find their own answers. But what's growing even faster than traditional self-service and knowledge-based software is this idea of community, and the idea that if you create a platform where consumers can help each other, they actually prefer that even over traditional self-service channels. So these are the trends that we've been seeing evolve over the course of the last several years. Natalie, I was wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about, what's your point of view on these trends, and what do you think is driving these trends?
Well, I think part of it is that the phone call is still number one. Part of it is because traditionally self-service has not been very effective. And so what ends up, people try to use web self-service and it's not designed properly. And so as a result, people get frustrated and they still pick up the phone. I think what people will gravitate to the channel that is actually providing them the quickest, shortest, best answer. And I think what we're seeing in communities is because it's really a dialogue and an interaction between customer to company, all that back and forth, that there's real value in the content depending on how it's set up. And the other thing that we're seeing is that this is kind of predicting the future, is that a lot of millennials don't use phones. So Gen X, Gen Y, and if they happen to be your customers or customers of the future, if you're not really looking at community or self-service, you're going to miss out on a very large chunk of, of potential or current customers. And I think that when you are able to really provide a really satisfying self-service experience, and people, get their question or their thing fixed in the first contact, I think you're going to see self-service increase. It may never overtake voice, but it's really up to companies to start to use platforms, especially like Get Satisfaction, where you're preserving the integrity of the customer experience in self-service, but you're also, offloading the costs that you would normally have with the customers interacting with agents.
Yeah. Natalie, I think there's, I'm solidly Gen X, so I think I'm right in the middle. I'm 42. I'm right in the middle of the Gen X range. But, I actually don't prefer phone myself, and I think part of that has to do with the rise of search engines and Google, Bing, and Yahoo. I sort of learned, and I think a lot of people like me learned over the last 10 years, that sometimes the fastest way to get an answer to your question is actually just to go to Google and type it in, like word for word, even put a question mark at the end of it. And so I know, there's this sort of larger meta trend that has nothing to do with self-service channels, but just with the way people think about self-service. And there's these technology tools that also help you just think about being more self-directed and do it yourself in terms of how you find answers to questions. Have you seen that with some of your other clients or some of your other research?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Google's really interesting because if you think about it, you want to ask a question, you want to find an answer, you really don't always know what the name of the company's community or website or what it is. So you go to Google and you'll type in your question. And what's really interesting is if you have a dynamic FAQ and community that's indexed by Google type search engines, then your community is going to come up first. And for instance, I know GetSat does this really well. And so if people's tendency is to go directly to Google and to Google a question, the whole idea here is how do you get your community to come up first in the Google search without having to pay for pay-per-clicks or do a lot of SEO. And that was one of the things, right, that we found really interesting about, over the last 4 or 5 years of working together, was that because the communities are indexed by Google type search engines, more and more people are finding the answers they need just through a Google search.
That's right. That's right. And I think that's really one of the really hidden value drivers behind community platforms, is the fact that they do index so well in search engines. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. The other large trend that we wanted to talk about is that this paradigm shift that really sort of started with service and support in terms of many-to-many interaction and one-to-many interaction, and the value becoming really clear behind customer self-serving, has also started to impact sales and marketing. And there's been, tons of companies built around this and different different analysts following this. But, from our point of view, it's really a shift from company-centric processes like, push marketing and marketing campaigns to being customer-centric processes, which are processes, around like pull marketing and, really the rise of content marketing in terms of B2B, which basically assumes that, your customer wants to evaluate your products and services on their own before they actually get sold to. And so there's been a larger shift in how, B2B and B2C companies think about marketing as well. In addition, there's the trend around sales where, if you rewind the clock, 15 or 20 years, one of the biggest ways that you could influence both consumers and businesses to purchase things was through personal relationships, but also through, quote, expert content, unquote. And the trend lately has been way more around sales being influenced more by social proof. And that social proof is really, coming from people like, if you're a consumer, people like me, you tend to be more influenced if you see that a friend has used the product or service, or if there's a review about the product or service that makes you realize that that person is similar to you, or if, even better, if there's a community around that product or service, you can actually see questions and answers that real customers have had about how those products and services work. And then in addition, obviously we already talked about this, but this trend from a company-centric process, which is one-to-one support, into one that's really about many-to-many support, and that's really a customer-centric process. So Natalie, I know you've been, working with, I was just wondering if you could talk about some of the ways that you've seen other companies adopt, community as a way to impact sales and marketing. I mean, we had a lot of conversations about this when we were planning, this research that we're just now going to be presenting in this presentation, where you've actually seen this work at other types of organizations. Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. So, my background was CRM and customer service, having been a management consultant, then a Forrester analyst. And around 2010, I took a job with an agency, and everybody's like, oh my God, she lost her mind. This is like, how could you just go 180 from in your career? And what I was seeing was what happens is that social is really changing the whole customer experience cycle. So it's not just customer service that needs to have a two-way conversation, but sales and marketing can also really benefit from them. And if you start to think about it, a lot of the interactions in customer service are actually things that maybe marketing or sales should be talking to customers. So if they ask a question, could I get this or could I get that, or what comes with that, or what's the guarantee? Those are all really questions that are top to mid funnel in terms of the marketing funnel. And so what we're seeing is that customer service has kind of always answered those questions, but now, like what you're saying about social proof, Edelman had a study that said 78% of people trust people like themselves versus the marketing and advertising that comes from a company. So the more content that is published by people who are not directly affiliated with a company, that's really creating this social proof. And because people don't really always believe the marketing from a company, what we're starting to see is this real drive to believe other people. And just think about it from your own point of view. I mean, every time I go to a movie or a restaurant, I check some of the sites to see what people are saying, and I make buying decisions based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, this is actually a really great segue. I'm really glad that you're highlighting the importance of content, because that's a great segue into, a conversation about what, when Get Satisfaction talks about what is a community, what we mean by a community. And, we've been in the business for, going on 6 years now, but, even from our earliest days, we always felt like and always communicated to our customers that community is really an online platform that facilitates conversations between companies and their customers. And, there, if there's not a conversational component to the application or to the service, then we feel like it's not a community. And so when I say conversation, I really mean that like there's a topic and that there's a threaded conversation that happens underneath it, where people can actually interact with each other and share information. The two critical pieces of the community are the content on the one side and the connections on the other side. So whenever you think about evaluating a community solution, always look at how does content get created and how do people interact with each other. Content plus people equals community. And when you have people, regular people, employees and customers creating content inside of a community platform, it creates tremendous opportunity for business value. And this business value, as we're going to discuss, can be leveraged for marketing, service and support, sales, brand awareness, R&D, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could have written like a much longer list here, but our best customers really think about community very holistically. They don't think about it just as being in a service and support silo. Even if they launch in a service and support silo, they're usually thinking about it much more broadly in terms of how they can leverage that content, the content and the connections for marketing, for sales, for product development, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and move on because I want to make sure that we get into the meat of the presentation. This is a study that what we're going to present today is basically a study that we did with Dr. Nat over the course of the last several months. What we did was we looked at data from several dozen Get Satisfaction customers. We observed trends and patterns in terms of how they identified, both qualitatively and quantitatively, the value that they had gotten out of their community. Most of these customers had been using the Get Satisfaction platform for at least a year. Although we did look at some customers who had actually just recently launched, just to make sure that there weren't any changes in how people were using the platform that had happened over time. And then together, led largely by Nat, we identified and categorized the value drivers that our customers were describing to us, and then created some baseline calculations that anybody could use to actually calculate the value of their community. We very intentionally did not call this an ROI study, although it really sort of is an ROI study, because ROI is basically one calculation, and it's what was your return divided by how much investment it took to get the return. And instead, we felt like it was more helpful in this study to actually show the math under the ROI equation, right? Which is, how did you actually determine the value that you got from implementing community? Because that's actually kind of the harder math than actually doing the ROI calculation. So Nat, did I cover the methodology adequately? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so just for the people who actually want to see the math, we always find it's really difficult to present math in a webinar. So we'll have a paper coming out, I believe, mid to late March. So you'll be able to see the actual calculations and the justification for how we came up with the numbers. But today we just want to look at those 4 value drivers and give you some of the highlights of what you'll be seeing in the study.
That's right. Thanks. Okay, so value driver number 1, and this one is sort of the no-duh one, and in fact we already talked about it when we were talking about the meta trends. But this one is the easiest to understand, and it's perhaps the easiest to measure as well, and it's the bottom line impact of reducing your service costs. And there's several ways. Really, the way to think about this one is, if you reduce the number of one-to-one interactions that customers are having with your support agents, then there's value there, right? Because it's just a really simple calculation in terms of, if each interaction costs $10 and you reduce the number of interactions by 1,000, then you save $10,000, right? So it's really simple math. But how the community does this is the really interesting thing, and it's really all about content, having your customers create really compelling content for you, having your customers create long-tail content that your service and support reps would never even think to write for a knowledge article. Have all of that content highly optimized for search engines, And then an added benefit is over time in the community, you're going to see that there are super users, at Get Satisfaction we call them champions, who emerge and actually start creating content on their own and start answering other customers' questions without your service and support staff even having to be involved. So this one, there's a tremendous source of value in this value driver alone. But we wanted to start with it just because it's the sort of lowest hanging fruit value driver. So Natalie, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, why is there so much low hanging fruit here? What's your perspective? I mean, you've been in the industry for a long time. I mean, why have more companies not adopted community for service and support?
Well, I think part of it is an education issue. So if you're a customer service director, the most expensive cost in a customer service center is going to be agent salaries. And so the ability to reduce the number of interactions that agents handle, whether it's calls or emails, it's going to overall reduce the operational costs of the contact center. But traditionally, the difficulty in reducing agent-handled phone calls results in a poor customer experience, lower customer acquisition, bad word of mouth, and customer churn. And so until the idea of communities came along, and not like the forums and bulletin boards of yesteryear, but a true community where people are interacting, it's only now that we're really starting to understand how you can reduce your customer service. But as I'm looking at the slide and I'm thinking about customer service, traditionally doesn't think about long tail content. They don't even think about themselves as content creators or users of content. But if you think about it, answers to people's questions are really content. And
Yep.
this whole and customer service is not used to thinking about search engine optimization, right? It's just not something that because they've been so phone oriented and
Right.
a little bit of web self-service, but it's never been something, SEO's never been something that they were concerned with. So now when you look at people doing, like we talked about before, the Google type searches, and the fact that the content, which is really the answers, are indexed by search engines, now you're organically getting people to the answers that they really want and need. And so my guess is that as customer service people truly understand the value here, we're going to see a large uptake in it. And then also I think millennials, tend not to use the phone. And so while I think, the whole idea of will we ever get rid of the phone, I don't think we will. But I think
Right.
when people figure out, hey, I can Google and find the community and find the answer, why wouldn't they do that?
Right. Right. That's great. I'm looking over Angeline's shoulder and I'm seeing some questions that are popping up. So I thought there's one right now that I thought would be really appropriate to talk about now. And that is someone was asking, how do you incentivize your community to be active and to be helpful with one another? And then sort of a follow-up question I think came from somebody else, which is how do you identify and incentivize those super users or those champions that we were discussing? So I can talk about that for a second, and I think it fits really well right here. Really, the way you identify your champions is really just by paying attention. And so in Get Satisfaction, we have an analytics platform called Community Health Analytics, and we help you see, based on all of the conversation that's happening in your community, who are the people that are just sort of like rising to the top and creating lots of content. And then you can do a deep dive into those people and see, like, strangely enough, I mean, 9 times out of 10, the people who are creating tons and tons of content actually are champions. They're people who are having a very positive affinity with your brand and with your company. And so really all it takes is they're raising their hand to be champions anyway. You just have to, like, call on them, like a teacher in the classroom. And the way that you can incentivize them is we have tons of different best practices, but what our platform can do is actually give them a badge that says that they're a champion. And we actually have the ability to give those champions access to moderation tools so that they can actually be moderating the community as well. There's tons of soft incentives that some of our customers use to just sort of like reward people and thank them for being champions. Everything from like swag and gift bags to access to coupons or access to early beta releases of products. It doesn't really take a lot of money. It just takes a little bit of attention to make sure that those people feel valued for their contribution. And one of the things that you'll notice over time is that, champions won't stay champions forever, but new ones will constantly be raising their hand. So it's really all about effective community management. So the customer example that we chose to use for this slide is actually Mint.com, which is one of Get Satisfaction's earliest customers. And when they launched Get Satisfaction, they were in a period of rapid growth. I mean, just crazy growth. This was in 2009. And within 60 days of launching Get Satisfaction, they saw a 75% reduction in their support tickets. And, while 75% sounds like a lot, actually a lot of our customers will get a bump that high. The benchmark tends to be more around 30-35%. But because Mint pushed all of their customer interactions through community first, they got an even higher bump in reduction in support tickets. And, so the discerning person might ask, well, by pushing every interaction through community, did that have a negative impact on customer satisfaction? Were customers frustrated that they had to go to community first? And actually the answer to that question is no. Actually, their CSAT scores went up. And the reason for that is that a lot of those customers were able to self-serve in community, and so they went away happy. And whereas if they went into an email queue, sometimes there would be a delay and they wouldn't get an answer to their question for several days, or maybe it took several interactions with the rep to get their question answered. And so that had a negative effect on customer satisfaction. And so therefore, community actually helped customer satisfaction while saving costs. Natalie, do you have any thoughts or anything to add to that?
Well, I think the other thing to consider, Scott, is how many instances are you using GetSat? So it's great if you just put it like maybe on your Facebook or maybe on your website, but we see a really dramatic increase when people use an instance of GetSat on all of their various presences. And so if you start to think about it, it's a better customer experience. It's found by Google. People are helping each other, and oftentimes your champions have more information and better information and answers than even the company can produce, because they're really spending the time really thinking about how to solve this. So
that's
there's
right. Quality content and interaction.
Great. It's really great.
Okay, so before I go on to the next slide, I had 3 other benchmarks that I just wanted to share. Kitty Care, which is a retailer in the UK, saw a 30% reduction in support costs. Rhapsody, which is the music streaming service, similar to Spotify and Rdio, saw a 50% reduction in support costs. And it works for B2B too. So one of our early B2B clients was Web Trends, and they saw a 70% reduction. So moving on to the next one. This one has more to do with improving support efficiency. And how we do this is actually the value driver comes from the multi-channel aspects of the community. And so community, our platform, the Get Satisfaction platform, can be embedded in your website, anywhere in your website. We have a widget technology that allows you to embed community wherever, on any page, or within any aspect of your online product. We also have, and this answers a question that came up earlier, we also have a mobile view of Get Satisfaction that's optimized for iOS and Android, but it works on any small screen device. We also have, as Natalie mentioned earlier, a Facebook application. So the benefit of having community in all of those channels is the same community content is accessible to those customers who come in, no matter how they came in, right? So they're accessing the same content and the same community no matter what channel they came through. Another big benefit to improve efficiency is the fact that the community is real time. So support agents and reps can know if big hot issues emerge that they need to keep their eyes on. They know it very much in real time. We've had lots of customers tell us that that's a key benefit of the platform. And then, we've already talked about the enhancement to internal knowledge and knowledge management, and integration with existing CRM systems and business workflows is also a huge benefit. So Natalie, I was wondering maybe if you could, add to this at all. Like, have you seen Any other ways that community can help make service organizations more efficient? Or have you seen some really great examples of using community to make the entire support infrastructure work better or more smoothly?
Absolutely. I mean, the key to customer service agents being able to give the right answer, and that's also true of self-service, is the knowledge base. And so if you think about it, most companies create knowledge-based content based on known customer issues and their known solutions. But research shows that customer service issues change really quickly, and if that information isn't updated into the knowledge base, which usually you have a knowledge manager and then they review the content and there's this whole long process. And so oftentimes customer service, either self-service or agents, they don't have the right information, and it can result in not really having answers to things that they didn't know were going to be issues, and it can lead to long support interactions, very poor first contact resolution, agent stress, and customer dissatisfaction. And so most organizations don't have a really good way to track repetitive questions. So answers, agents might spend the same time, a ton of time answering the same questions over and over. And so what's really key here is to be able to have the knowledge real time, dynamically updated on an ongoing basis, and that provides more relevant information, dynamically updated, so it's the real-time answer, and that's going to not only provide better self-service but also provide better agent service. So we see this kind of community solution really as a solution to the whole knowledge management capability, which is just basically giving people the answers that they need when they need it, where they need it.
That's right. And another benefit too is that if you integrate community into your CRM system, then it actually gives you more of a 360-degree view of the customer, because you'll be able to see their community interactions alongside their service and support interactions, and maybe even their purchase history inside your system of record. So the reference that we used for this slide was Restaurants on the Run, and this is actually a newer Get Satisfaction customer, but their stated goals for the community were to expand nationally without having to also linearly scale their support organization. And so they were really looking at ways that they could expand as much as possible without adding new reps, and because they knew that they were getting tons and tons of repetitive inquiry, that if they used a solution like community, it would help them to be able to do that. And another interesting thing that they're doing is they also integrate community with their web chat functionality through an integration that we built with a company called Valaro. And basically how that works is while the customer is waiting to connect to a chat agent, we actually search the community and display answers from the community before that connection with the agent is made. And what ends up happening is a lot of the time the customer actually gets their question answered without talking to an agent, or they're way more educated by the time that they connect to an agent, that the interaction with the agent either goes away completely or it's a lot shorter. So love that example. We're doing a webinar with Restaurants on the Run, I think next week. So if anybody who is on the line on the 12th, I just heard, if anybody on the line wants to hear more about the Restaurants on the Run use case, we're doing a webinar next week, so you can sign up for that. Okay, so the third value driver is, this is a big bucket, and so we call this bucket increase revenue. And there's lots of specifics about how to use community to increase revenue, but let's talk generally first. Generally, it's all about improving customer loyalty, purchase intent, and leveraging that content that gets created in the community for word-of-mouth social proof and word-of-mouth advocacy. And so, really you have to have your CMO or your VP of marketing involved in this conversation about how to use community for marketing purposes. So, Natalie, one of the things that I loved about our early conversations when we were doing this, when we were planning this study, is that you have a really interesting point of view on, because of your background in service and support, you have a really deep and interesting point of view on the negative impacts of not not addressing customer loyalty issues and customer satisfaction issues and the impact that that can have on customer lifetime value and purchase intent. So I was wondering if maybe you could just riff a little bit about that, just to educate us, more on the impacts of that.
Sure. So if you think about it, you can't sell things to people who are mad. And
Right.
what's really interesting about social customer service is that what is happening, what gets posted, is really, you might liken it to the canary in the coal mine. What people are saying, and this, it's not that it's changed, it's just that in the old days, all that content about what people didn't like or were upset about end up staying in the agent's head and very rarely being integrated back into the customer service department or any of the other departments. And so, people might be saying, well, the handle falls off and I want to return this and I never want to buy from you. But if the company doesn't know that the handle's falling off, then basically customer service is the one handling the issue, but the issue isn't really being addressed somewhere else in the organization. So if you start to think about a whole customer life cycle and you think about what customers are saying, you can start to really use community as almost like a diagnostic tool where you're starting to see what people are upset about. And I think the difference between social and regular customer service is that whatever's wrong or not working in your company is going to show up in customer service. The reason is because that's where people go after experiencing your product and service, and that's where this gold mine really of data and information about what's working, what's not working is. So if you start to think about the bad word of mouth, so what we see a lot of times is with respect to revenue is if there's bad word of mouth, that's going to make other customers churn. You also
Right.
sometimes see if you're not managing the community and the interactions and you're not there part of the conversation, that you can have a bad advocate kind of have a runaway conversation. And so the last thing you want to do is have customer service contribute to churn, but it's happening every day. And then the
Right.
other part is, what if your word of mouth was positive? So if you look at the 1-9-90 principle, and those percentages move around a little bit depending on the industry, but 1%, the brand champions are going to post, 9% respond, and 90% lurk. So if you start to look at your community interactions as maybe a tenth or a 20th of your total customer uh, you know, interactions, now you can start to see where you really want to, one, take care of the bad word of mouth. And what happens is customers don't really expect a company to be perfect. They do expect that when you reach out and you have a problem, that you have their back and you fix it. So as you're doing customer service and you're setting up your community, you want to see, one, do we need to do some cleanup? Do we need to say we're sorry and apologize and fix things and get that whatever's not working back to other departments? And then the second piece is really looking at how do we create that customer loyalty. So if you think about the marketing funnel, it goes awareness, interest, consideration, purchase. Most companies stop there. But what communities like Get Satisfaction, now we can do full funnel in our customer life cycle where we're doing advocacy, referral, and recommendations. And so I know when I go to buy something, I look at what the reviews are and I consider what other people are saying. And so if we start to look at our calculations, which we have in the paper, you can dramatically affect churn and you can dramatically affect revenue and customer lifetime value by being, interactive with these customers.
That's right. So the reference that we used here was MindJet, which MindJet is a company that does collaboration software. And one of their stated goals for launching Community was actually to create more of a customer-centric culture in their organization, and they knew that that would have marketing benefits. And then we followed up with them, about a year after they launched, and we asked them, like, were you successful? Did you create a customer-centric culture? And what were the top and bottom line benefits? And they talked way more about the top line benefits than they did the bottom line benefits. And one story in particular was about, they had gotten some early feedback in their community on some pricing changes that they were considering making. And because they got that feedback early, they were able to actually create a different level of service to address that customer profile's concerns, and they felt like that really protected a lot of the revenue through what can be a turbulent type of transition when you change your pricing and packaging. And that was just one example. They gave us like literally 10 examples. And then just in terms of, so that's like sort of a soft example. In terms of a hard example, this is a company that sells online. They sell a SaaS product online, and so any increase in referral traffic that they get that they don't have to pay for has value for them. And so they saw a measurable and significant 3% increase in their marketing site page views that were coming from exclusively from the community interactions. And those were new customers. That was new customer acquisition that they were seeing. I wanted to tell another story real fast before we go on to the next slide about we actually just started working with a major consumer brand whose stated interest in community out of the gate was, we spend way too much money on SEM, on search engine marketing, and we have this theory. We think that if we put a lot of really awesome content in the community and we let our customers create even more awesome content, that we're going to be able to lower our SEM spend. And just over the course of, they haven't even launched yet, but over the course of like evaluating, the content that we've been preceding the community with, we definitely think that we're going to be able to reduce their SEM spend significantly. And this is a brand that spends millions of dollars on SEM. So then the last bucket is lower operational costs for PR. And this one is, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on this one, Natalie, because I definitely want to get to some Q&A. But this one is really interesting in terms of, it's sort of an unexpected value driver. This one actually, the customers who tell us about this one always tell us, like, I wasn't expecting this to have a huge impact, but it did. And this one has to do with, there are PR issues that emerge from time to time, sometimes negative crisis situations, sometimes positive, where actually having a community application that's highly indexed by search engines means that if they give a really definitive response in the community, they can refer to that definitive response, and they can funnel all of their additional customer inquiry into that one conversation, that one community conversation, or that one community topic. And what does this do? Like, how does this help lower operational costs? Well, it really mitigates spikes in call volume and email volume in one way. So those PR crisis issues tend to be things that, like, the support organization would really have to bear the brunt of it. And by having community helps mitigate that to a large extent. There's another value, which is the other methods of addressing PR issues have a lot to do with earned media. And so PR firms and organizations have to spend a lot of time, like, making sure that the press understands what's happening, or trying to get, articles written about the issue in the newspaper. One of our customers even told us, like, our alternative to posting a topic in the community is trying to get on the Today Show. It's like that's how they're, like, the value, the value reference that they were using for really trying to understand how community helps here. But, this is, like, lesser known but really interesting impact. And so, Natalie, maybe if you could just give us some thoughts really quickly. I want to make sure that we get into the Q&A portion.
Sure. So I think, what we're really seeing is the breakdown of the silos between marketing, sales, service, and PR, and never before has there been a need. I call it the witness factor, because what's really happening is anything bad that's happening with and around a company is now put on the internet, right? And so now all that stuff is being made public. And so oftentimes, like we said, it shows up in customer service, but it ends up being a PR nightmare. So if you look at just having to create dark sites and do all kinds of PR mitigation, there's savings there. And then also, like you said, the spikes in call volume. So I'm really encouraged. I am a collaborator by nature. And so I'm really encouraged to see what's really fascinating is, instead of people collaborating because it's the right thing to do, software is actually driving behavior inside of companies. And so, I look forward to a new kind of corporate America in 10 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you look at, how much effort is spent on addressing negative PR issues, there's really something to be gained by just breaking down the silos a little bit and changing how the company responds to those issues. And we've seen a lot of our customers benefit from that. The reference here that I used was Applegate, which is a company that makes like sausages and deli meats. You've probably seen them in your supermarket. And you know, their staff tells us that the community really gives their PR organization a real-time pulse on consumer concerns. And because they're a food brand, those consumer concerns can sometimes get a little bit out of control. And so they love the fact that the community gives them sort of like early warning, as well as giving them a place where they can actually respond effectively to issues. And so the example they gave us was, you know, occasionally topics come up in the community about their humane sourcing of meat, and they have a really, it's one of their brand differentiators, and so they love the fact that they can address that right there in the community. Okay, so you know, here's some examples of business results from all of our customers. You know, we only talked about 4 buckets here. The paper talks about more. There's tons of value that our customers get from Get Satisfaction. But I really want to segue into questions and answers because we've only got about 10 minutes left. Natalie, there's one that I just wanted to answer real fast just because I see it right here. You know, people are asking, is Get Satisfaction used at companies where clients all are competitors and as such don't want to share information with other clients? And so I think this is a really interesting question, and there's another flavor of this question which I think has to do with, you know, what if I don't want my community to be so transparent, or I don't want it to be so discoverable? So maybe we could just riff on this a little bit. I mean, I have a point of view, but I'd really love to hear yours first.
Well, yeah, there's this openness really creates some interesting issues for companies, and especially if you're creating something that's very proprietary. So, I mean, we work with companies all the time that need a private community. So it's something that's very doable. You can also make it like, let's say you want to reward your beta users or your brand advocates or champions, you can create a community inside of a community. So what I don't want people to walk away with is that you always have to have an open community. You can, rope it off and make sure that, you invite the people and there are specific people that you want in that community. The downside is it won't be as discoverable by the search engines, but it's,
Right.
You have to weigh the different options and what's most important to you.
No, that's right, and that's exactly what I was going to talk about, so I'm glad we're on the same page. I was just going to say, like, it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not that your community is 100% open or 100% closed and private. There's shades of gray in between. And so at Get Satisfaction, there's 4 shades of gray right now, which is there's completely private, which is nobody can access the community at all unless you give them a login. There's access controlled, meaning like only people that you give permission to post can actually post, but anybody can see the content. There's hidden communities, which are communities that are completely public. Anybody can post, but we just don't. We put a no index on the community so that search engines don't crawl the content, and so you're not going to get any extraneous page views. And then there's completely open, which is crawled by search engines. Anybody can access. Anybody could post. And then there's permutations of all 4 of those. Some product development work that we're working on right now, and we're probably going to be doing a webinar on this in April, is we're actually blowing up that whole model of privacy, and instead we're going to have the capability for you to have, as a brand, to have communities within communities, where you can, for instance, maybe have a community of champions within your larger public community, or maybe you can have a community of private issues within a larger public community, and you can move content very seamlessly back and forth in between those different communities and sub-communities. So I'm super excited about that, and be on the lookout for a webinar about our second half product roadmap, because that's going to be launching this year, and we're psyched about it. So that's the end of that commercial. Let's see. I'm looking at the questions right now. I do want to answer this one question because I used a piece of jargon, and I think somebody didn't know what SEM was. So SEM stands for search engine marketing, and when you think about SEM, think about like buying Google AdWords or buying advertising in search engines. And so if you buy AdWords, then when people do certain queries, you're going to show up in the sponsored links box at the top of the search engine results page. And so how community helps with that is that if you have content in your community that answers really common customer questions or has words in the topics that you would normally be buying AdWords for, the community content will show up organically on the first page of results, often in the #1 slot. And so therefore, if it's showing up organically on the first page of results, you don't need to buy the AdWords, or you can buy fewer AdWords, or you can target your ad spend on words that you know have a big bang for the buck and let community fill in the rest of that organic referral traffic. So I wanted to make sure I answered that because I apologize for using an acronym. I try not to do that, but it's hard not to, as you guys know. Let's see. Angelina, are there any other questions that you think I should answer? Let's see. Yeah, right here it says, do you have clients using Get Satisfaction for internal purposes, internal marketing, internal support, et cetera? So I think the answer about privacy answers that. So we do have some customers who have completely private communities that they use solely for internal purposes, or maybe for external purposes, but it's a very closed environment they want to be having the dialogue in, such as a community of your distribution partners would be an example. So even though they're not employees, they're still having a sort of a closed and a private conversation. Are there any other questions that have come up from the community? No? Okay. Cool. So Nat, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks? I think we're almost at the top of the hour.
Well, I just want to leave people with the idea that customer service, as we've known it, is completely transforming itself based on these new technologies. And the really cool thing about the new technologies, the Web 2.0 based type things, is they're so much less expensive than the on-premise, hardware intensive, software intensive old systems. And I really encourage people to take a look at apps like Get Satisfaction. And it doesn't really matter if you're in PR or marketing or sales or customer service. What you're going to find is there's value buckets for every single department. And if you start, if you could get the attention of your CEO and say, look, we could be really transforming our company by using systems like this. And think about a company that really transforms how they're interacting with their customers, and they fix things and they apologize. And then think about a company that completely ignores this stuff. I think the future is going to be really clear for companies that can stay in business and those that can't.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think I think customer communities are still an underleveraged asset, and we've been seeing more and more attention being given to the value that can be provided from customer community. And so I want to reiterate what you said, which is if you take nothing else away from this conversation that we've had today, I would love it if the attendees could keep in mind that the value that community can provide is not restricted to one part of the organization or one silo of the organization. We talk a lot about service and support just because it's, as I said, it's the easiest first place to start when you're doing a value calculation. But there's tons of value for marketing, for sales, for PR, for product development. We have tons of customers that the first way they start using us is just to get feedback on products. And then they get so much value from that use case that they end up, using us for marketing or using us for service and support as well. So just think about community as really this Swiss Army knife tool that can just get you closer to your customers, make you a more agile organization, and reap huge benefits in terms of customer experience and customer loyalty. So with that, I think we're just about out of time. I want to thank you so much, Nat, for joining, and I think that's it. So yeah, thanks so much, you guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.